Good evening, everybody. I'm Dr. Mary Ann Birch and Natasha, and welcome to the BirchBark webinar. Tonight, I'm very excited because we're going to talk about financial and estate planning for your pets. I think it's a really valuable thing that I see as a veterinarian being an important part of any pet owner's decision making. So BirchBark sponsors these education webinars as part of our program. For those of you that might not know about BirchBark Foundation, we are nearly 10 years old and on the Central Coast have been saving the lives of pets for that 10-year period. What we do is we partner with the veterinarians in the community to help people who are in the low-income categories pay for urgent care for their pets, preventing economic euthanasia. We do this through a pet aid program. And then we also work with people who are in the process of trying to honor their human-animal bond by having pet loss support grief programs. We have support sessions twice a month, as well as individual counselors who are on call for helping people going through that grief of losing a pet. So we preserve the human-animal bond with our pet aid gifts. We honor the human-animal bond with our pet loss support, and then we strengthen the human-animal bond with our education series. And our education series allows people to be better partners with their pets, to advocate for them, whether it's a medical issue, whether it's behavior issues, and whether it's a decision about making sure that your pet has necessary care if something happens to you. And that's going to be the focus tonight. So I'm very excited to work with Kristina Kuprina, who is the founder and CEO of Sequoia Wealth Advisors. And she is a fantastic supporter of BirchBark. She's done a great match for us this month. The organization understands the value of pets coming into lives of people. And I'm very pleased that we have their support and their collaboration in our efforts here on the Central Coast. One of my favorite things when I met Kristina and we started talking was her background is in economics. And when we think about financial planners and wealth advisors, I always think about somebody with a finance background. And I think you said it really well. Economists look forward and accountants look backwards. And the combination of those two things helps everyone look almost in all directions or both ways up and down the road. So I'm really looking forward to hearing her talk tonight. And so we can learn more about how to plan carefully for our pets. So thank you for joining us and welcome, Kristina.
Thank you. I don't know whether to call you Marianne or Dr. Birch, so.
Marianne is fine.
Okay. Well, thank you, Marianne, for your very kind words. And thank you, everyone who is listening, either live or to the recording. I know there's a big election going on right now. So I'm going to bring up some of the questions that people have asked me a lot in the past in my practice. However, I want to make sure that everyone listening to this, whether you're listening live or the recording later, as Marianne mentioned, we are very, very big supporters of animals. We're very big supporters of what BirchBark does. So if you don't have your questions answered tonight live, you can reach out. BirchBark will send you my contact information, and I will answer your questions. This is a consultation. There is no cost to this consultation, no obligation, no nothing. It is in service to the animals, and this can help you best with your planning. You just saw Marianne's Natasha on my shoulder, hiding in my hair. This is one of my fur babies. Her name is Two Spot. So me and my connection to animals is I adopt and rescue pet rats. I have quite a number of them right now due to some unplanned litters, not of my making, of getting a pregnant female. And some have homes and some are going to be with me for their entirety of their lives. Rats do not live long, on average 2 years. I've got a couple of older ones right now. And I'm going to bring this up, it's very important in the pet planning. I also have horses. I also adopt wild Mustangs. So I have horses. So this is the great segue into planning for your pets. So I've been doing financial planning for over 30 years. And for many years, financial planning was much more to do with retirement, your lifetime. Do you have enough money? And that's still a big part of what we do. But as people go on through the planning process and start to look towards the future of their life and the future beyond their lifetime, start to think about more than just, do I have enough? You start to think about, how do I care for those I love? How do I make sure my family is going to be okay when I'm no longer here? And is probably very real for everyone listening to this today. Our families sometimes look a little different. So I'm going to take this little guy off my shoulder here because he's starting to get a bit rambunctious, but that would be a really good example of, they look a bit different. So let me just find the page here. Sorry about that distraction. I felt like just going to start running all over my keyboard here. So our family extends beyond, our parents, our children, our nieces, nephews, aunts, and uncles, to our fur babies. And the one thing about planning is how animals are seen in the world of planning. So before I jump into that, one other disclaimer that I have to share with you. Not knowing the state of residence of everyone listening to this recording, and also with a caveat that I am a financial planner, I am not an attorney, is very important to take the information I share with you today and bring it to your financial planner, or to me if you choose to do that, and to attorneys. Okay, and make sure the attorneys specialize in animal related or pet related planning. The reason for this is that different states have different rules. And so I'm going to give a lot of general information today that's applicable in most areas, but it's not entirely. The other thing is that this is also a general audience, which means each one of your individual situations would probably mandate that you do things a bit differently, require that you do things differently to meet your overall objectives and goals. How long your pet will live, how many people you have to care for them in your lifetime, the specific needs that they have daily, as well as the longevity, again, of the animal. So many, many factors come into this. This is general information today to give you some thoughts, some ideas, some ways of doing things. But I can't stress enough the importance of working with someone, and probably more than one someone that has an expertise in this area. So I gave a little bit about my background. I love rescuing animals. You may be, well, why rats and horses? Why not dogs and cats? My husband's highly allergic to dogs and cats. So it is rats and horses for us. Love them all dearly, all the living creatures. So when planning for your pets, there are two really, really important considerations. Actually, there's many of them, but I'll bring up the first ones first, is during your lifetime. That is, if you become incapacitated or unable to care for them permanently, you're still alive, but it's a permanent situation, or temporarily. Okay, and not only incapacity, another consideration is, what if you can't get to them and there's an emergency? Okay, a very sad fact, and the lawyers in the room will certainly be nodding their heads. Pets are seen as property. They are not seen as people. Property in the law, the world of laws, is seen very differently, which means they have a special consideration when it comes to planning. You cannot leave money to your pet. You must leave money to the guardian or the trustee over your pet's trust in the state. So there's many considerations of how to structure this, like I said, depending on what specifically you're trying to accomplish. But I'm going to give an example, and I'll do a little bit of storytelling here in some of these examples, because they're either my stories or client stories, or situations I'm familiar with that may trigger why you'd want to do this kind of planning. So during your lifetime, a situation where you may not be able to care for your pets would be, you were in an auto accident, you're hospitalized for a period of time, you don't have someone else living in your household with you, or someone nearby that automatically has access to your home to feed your cats, to feed your dogs. Perhaps your pets have special needs and require extra care due to a medical condition. They need shots, they need regular food, they need very specialized food, specific periods of time. So having a person designated, both legally and also accessibility and with care instructions, is important. Regardless of any other planning that you do, it's very important that you have somewhere where someone close by that you trust knows where this is, instructions of what your animals need, instructions of what to do in an emergency situation. So here's an example. As I said earlier, you're in an auto accident, you're in the hospital, you're not seriously injured, you'll probably be out in a day or so. Well, who's going to feed your dog? Who's going to feed your cat? Does your cat have a special diet? Does it require medication? These are important things for someone to know, that maybe it's not something that you share those details with somebody, again, who's close by that has access to your living quarters, your home and whatnot. So that is a good prudent thing to do regardless for planning, is have those instructions. So I'm going to use myself as an example. So I split my time between Nevada and California. In Nevada, where my horses live, I live in a very rural area that has a very, very serious risk of fire. It's a constant concern, especially in the summer months, that there be a fire. So my neighbors, closest neighbors, because we're all pretty far apart out there, asked me, said, I'm not really much of a horse person. If we get an evacuation order and you're not home, what am I supposed to do about the horses? I had to really think that through. What do you do with the horses? So fortunately, there are things you can do. You can put an air tag woven into their mane. There are tracking devices for a horse and whatnot. But horses actually will not, you can't just open the gate and hope they run away when a fire's coming. Strangely, they will actually often stay in the place they see as safe, even at the risk of their own life. So there's steps that need to be taken for them to know what would you do in an emergency if you can't trailer a horse. People that were involved in the CZU fires in Santa Cruz County, that was one of the biggest challenges, is those fires moved very quickly and there wasn't a lot of time to evacuate for some people, especially up in the Bonnie Doon area. And making sure that you have horses trailer trained, you have access to trailers. Same goes for any other large animals or livestock. So that's a practical thing to tie in with the planning as far as how people take care of them. So any animals that you have, be they fish, rats, cats, dogs, horses, there's a clear set of instructions, and someone you trust who's nearby has access to those instructions. So that's your day-to-day planning, because it can happen to any one of us for any reason. Something happens to us or something greater happens, like example, the evacuation, or why you want to have that. So take a moment or two and get that information together and make sure the person that you would want to step in is able to do so and knows where this information is, medications, etc. So the other thing is, during your lifetime is incapacity. There are a couple of different ways to see this, is that, remember, animals are property. Because animals are property, if someone doesn't have a legal right, you can have an informal agreement. Hey, neighbor, if something happens, you can come over and feed my animal, but they don't have the legal right. So what happens if this goes on longer? What happens if your capacity, the situation that caused you to lose capacity, is permanent or very long lived? Now you're looking for a little bit more than someone stepping in a few days or a week or so to care for your animal. Now you're looking for a situation where someone is going to take the word possession, control, and ownership when it comes to an animal, but those, of course, are the legal terms. But that person is not going to have full responsibility for that. So there's two components to this here. Number one, geographic location. Okay, and this is the same thing we're doing financial planning around people with children, with minor children. The person that you may want to be the guardian for your animals may not be the person who's closest geographically. So if something was to happen and your sister's the one who's going to take your dogs and she's located in Denver, Colorado, she's probably not going to get there to feed them that evening. So it's important to consider a local guardian that's more of a temporary short-term solution. Potentially would be a different person that would be the long-term person that would permanently take on the responsibility of caring for your animals. So that's consideration. So think of the short-term guardian, the emergency person close by geographically and has the ability to do it, and the willingness, of course. The long-term person would need at least the ability and willingness to take on your animals and the resources to do so. Within this, if you create these, again, I'm going to talk about the entity in a moment. If you create this situation, there's a couple different ways to do it, or sorry, create the solution for the situation, a couple ways to do it. Again, you're alive. So you can have a pet trust, okay, which can be structured. If you already have a living trust, an attorney who's knowledgeable on the subject can easily incorporate that into your living trust, revocable living trust. You make that change and add this in, because there's an ability for someone to step in. You can also have someone having power of attorney over the care of your animal, which gives them legal authority to step in and care for your animal. These types of firmer structures during your lifetime is more important if you think there's going to be an argument about that, if you think someone's going to contest that. When I see this happen most often in my planning practice, especially planning around animals, is if there's a divorce, that situation where there's a lot of fighting about it, when the children fight, who's going to get the dog, oh, I don't like you. When there's going to be any kind of more adversarial situations between family members, that's a more common time when you may have a fight about it, and or the person that you necessarily don't want to be the caregiver becomes the caregiver because they kind of force their way into it. So having that incorporated into your trust, kind of a pet trust within a trust, you can do that. You can have separate pet trusts. So in a situation, if you, for whatever reason, have not put together a trust or choose not to put together a trust, you can have just a trust for your pet. There's some very important considerations about that too, is different states have very different rules. So, it's a statutory pet trust. They basically, it's covered. All states have a version of this, but some states are very strict about what that can encompass. Like some states, I think it's Florida, has rules that you can't put too much money in it. It's kind of a subjective term, too much money. It has to be appropriate and suitable for the animal. So you won't hear any of those stories in the pet trust goes, $20 million for the care of a dog or something like that. That's the intention of it. But then you have to determine how much is reasonable to put in there. And of course, that's unknown. What care does your pet need? What health conditions they need? How long will it live? Sort of, I guess. Other states pet trusts expire after a certain period of time, in which case, if you have a longer living animal like a horse, it may be a concern or consideration. So again, very, very important to work closely with an attorney that is knowledgeable in your state of residence. And it's been very familiar working with pet trust to whether you want to create a pet trust, a pet will with a guardian or power of attorney, formal or informal, is somewhat up to you. So my intention today with bringing you this information is primarily to trigger ideas and thoughts and to help you decide on your financial planning and on your planning for your pets. And this is not just if you're of a certain age, because any one of us could not be able to care for our pets tomorrow, of many situations that are beyond our control. Another consideration is in longer term, kind of in an estate planning situation, is what I mentioned earlier with long living pets. So I have a client who owns a parrot. The parrot will almost certainly live longer than she does. The parrot also hates men. Go figure, right? So none of her sons or any of the male family members that are close to her in her life are going to be taking care of this parrot beyond her lifetime. It's very important for her to accommodate the parrot and its long life into the trust. And that was a consideration because you don't necessarily think, how long will my animals live? Another consideration with it is, and I'm not getting into very specific, like an animal that maybe has a very high price tag or something like that. I'm not getting into financial thing at all. Those are considerations, but this is really more for the love of our animals and making sure that they get a good home. And Marianne did mention to me, I'm familiar with some of these organizations. If you do not have that person in your life that you would trust, not even necessarily trust, but has the ability to care for your animal, if something was to happen to you, there are organizations that will take them on. They generally are going to require some financial consideration if you're able to do so, but there are definitely some organizations that do this. I wrote them down in the rut, knocked everything over. So Peace of Mind and Slido, I think of the names, and I apologize. BirchBark will get you these specific names of these organizations that are local that can help in this area too, if you're looking for somebody. So that is a challenge. Not all of us have people in our lives that we can, that can take care for them. Not that they would love to. So many people would love to, but they have the ability to do so based on their life situation. If you have the ability to consider financial assistance or financial considerations for the person that will be taking on your animals, unless you do not think that this is going to be an issue. I have done a lot of financial planning and a lot of estate planning over the years, and oftentimes the dog will go to the family member that so dearly loves the dog, the cat, right? But this person may not be in the financial means to be able to care for them. It's going to be a struggle to cover the veterinary bills. It's going to be a struggle to do the care necessary financially. So if you do have the financial means to do so, do consider that the person that you make the permanent guardian of your animal or animals is also able to have the financial resources to be able to do that. Because there's nothing worse than them after losing you, now they lose the animal because they're unable to care for them and have to turn them in. So that's an important consideration. Another one is, I'm saying animals to be very general, but the planning that you would do for your fish would be different than the planning that you do for your horse. Not just about longevity, it's the care required. A horse needs a significant amount more care and resources than a fish does. Not trying to in any way value one over the other, it's just that consideration. Longevity of the animals is another factor as well. So in my estate planning, my husband and I don't have children, and we don't have any immediate family members that are going to take on our horses or our rats. So we needed to have a plan for that. And so we set aside a financial component to the people that would be taking them on as well. The rats have a different financial metric than the horses, but that's a consideration too. What would be realistic to be able to care for them, given how long they live and the amount of workload that goes placed with that. I know I just kind of said a lot of stuff really, really fast. I do have a couple of questions that come up a lot that I can address. But before I do so, I just want to take a breather for a moment and check in, Marianne, and see if there's any questions that you have.
I don't have a direct question, but I didn't tell the attendees they're welcome to type questions into the Q&A code at the bottom of the webinar. And Kristina is generously offered to answer specific questions, and even during the presentation and as well at the end. So please jump in if anyone has specific questions.
Yes, please do, because this is a lot. I could talk for an hour on all the variables on this, and the purpose today was just to give high level considerations, because this is a very personal, just like personal financial planning is very personal and very individualized, and it has a lot of components to it. So is planning and caring for our animals. So I will bring up a couple of questions that I get often, and these are important ones. The question, I said maybe more a comment, but it's also a question. So when I'm doing estate planning and financial planning, oftentimes, actually more often than not, there's a bit of guilt when people are leaving money to the pet, to the animal, right? What are my children going to think? I'm leaving animals. Now, remember what I mentioned earlier, animals are property. You can't leave them money directly, but you're setting aside a portion of your estate, the remaining of your estate, to the care of your animal. And there's, for many people, regardless of how much we love our fur babies, there's that, is this a fair thing to do? Is this the right thing to do? I'm not giving the money to my children. I'm giving some of my money to the guardian or the trustee of my animal. And my response to that is, animals are like your family. They didn't come to you in the way that your family came to you, but they came to you as part of your life. I'm personally, and I'm saying this personally as well as a planner, a strong belief it is your money, it is your choice, and you get to do what you want to do. And there's been a big shift in the financial planning world. I would say probably like the last 5-6 years, I've really seen it ramp up a lot, where people are thinking differently about estate planning, and they're not necessarily giving it all to the kids or giving it all to one person or a family. They're thinking, who in my life really made a difference and helped me, could really use a little bit of financial help, right? What organizations do I want to support beyond my lifetime that can really make a difference in the world? This expansive thinking in estate planning has really taken hold. It's almost parabolic how much this has moved in the estate planning world. So it's becoming increasingly common for people to modify and adjust their trust to leave money for the animals. And the question that comes tied to that too is, well, what happens if my animals pass before I do? That can be written into the trust. So it's very simple to say, if say, make up a name, Two Spot, right? If Two Spot it lives longer than I do, Aunt Sally will take on Two Spot, and X amount of dollars goes towards to Aunt Sally for Two Spot's care. If Two Spot predeceases me, then that money, that portion goes into the trust for the remaining beneficiaries. So there's plenty of ways to, and I'm giving you very basic general ideas. There's plenty of ways to write out that trust, and that can determine whether or not, because to the best of my knowledge, none of us know when our last day on this planet and this body is. So it's impossible to know for certainty, and the same goes for our animals as well. So factoring that in. Another thing that I've seen done is people say, okay, if Two Spot predeceases me, then, if Two Spot passes away and there's money remaining, sorry, I misspoke here. If two spot pass away and there's money remaining in the pet trust, that money is donated to BirchBark, right? Or to another organization. So that's specifically continuing on its purpose of being in service to animals or caring for animals. So you can do this within the trust as well. So there's a couple of different ways depending on what your considerations with that is. And then the nice thing about that is if you're uncertain what the cost of how long your animals will live and what the cost of care will be, if you're having a little more funding there, it allows that money to be distributed still within your wishes, not just kind of rattling about there. So again, it could go to the other beneficiaries, it could go to an animal organization, it could be a combination, depends on how you do that. And a little bit of stories on there. I have seen some pretty extravagant trusts put together for animals, where there's some pretty amazing things that's being done beyond the lifetime. Because a lot of times when people are personally financial planning, the most important consideration is making sure they have enough within for their lifetime to meet all of their needs, all of their care needs, and things like that. And so sometimes people could be a little more cautious giving during their lifetime because of those concerns. Now, I will say a good financial plan can mitigate a lot of that, but it is still a concern that people have. And so giving more money after their lifetime it made me be more comfortable than giving a lot during their lifetime. So that's a way of caring for their animals and then going beyond that. So that could be a consideration for you. Well, okay, I'm going to read the last question that I get oftentimes from people is, I really think that Aunt Sally would be the best person to take care of Two Spot. I'm picking on my rat's name. However, she's really, really bad with money. Like, I don't know if I give her this big chunk of money to take care of Two Spot, I don't know if that's going to be a really wise decision. You can have a trustee in your trust. So trusts beyond your lifetime, your trust, your living trust becomes irrevocable. But there are many situations in the estate planning where new trusts are created from that trust. An example would be if you have a child or a family member with special needs, that may go into a special needs trust for their care. Maybe you have a beneficiary that's not in a position in life where they can be a really good, take good care of themselves or with money. So maybe that trust now becomes another trust, and that trustee manages it for their care over time. So they're not getting a large sum of money and not having a good outcome with it. So the very same thing can be done for your animals as well. That pet trust portion of it can have a trustee assigned. The financial trustee can be different than the caregiving trustee. Okay, so I wanted to stress that. So I'm going to use my Aunt Sally example. The portion of the trust becomes a pet trust. That the Two Spot goes to Aunt Sally. Aunt Sally takes care of them, and the trustee is paying out money for Two Spot's care. That helps out. Again, it's not uncommon that the caregivers in our lives are not necessarily the best financially. The other reason that for consideration of that pet trust, I call it the pet trust within a trust because I didn't want to make you think you had to create two trusts unless you wanted to, is that it's easy for you to modify, easier for you to modify if things change. But the other component to it is coming back to what I originally said is animals are property in the eyes of the law. So when you have a trustee there, there's some oversight on making sure this animal is given the proper care in case something happens where the person you designated turns out not to be a very good guardian of the animal. You've got another set of eyes on the situation. And again, not saying this person's a bad person. Perhaps their health is suffering. Perhaps they find themselves in a situation where for out of financial necessity, they have to move to another location to take a job. Life is full of surprises. I can say that for sure. Life is full of surprises, and you want to make sure that you can be nimble and adjust things, but you also have that extra layer of care, again, especially if the caregiver is not the best financially. So, boy, I really feel like I said a lot. It's always interesting talking when I'm not seeing the people I'm talking to. And I do I want to kind of close out by stressing animals are a really, really, really big part of my life. BirchBark is an amazing organization. I'm incredibly proud, and I want to say I have tremendous gratitude for the fact that I can be a sponsor of the work that they're doing. Is incredibly important. Our animals, and we care for the animals, and to care for the people caring for the animals. It's a really powerful mix of what they do. And so if anyone watching this evening, or in the future wants to understand this in a little more detail or have specific questions, BirchBark will pass on my information. Send me an email or call the office, mention BirchBark. Okay, so that I know what this is for, and I'll be more than happy to talk with you or meet with you and kind of talk to you a bit more about your individual situation. And you can use this information to take back and incorporate that into your financial plan. There's also a lot of nuances about this too. Again, I was covering at a very high level that a couple of questions on your end may help direct you to the right direction to go. I'm honored to be able to do this. I'm happy to do it. Please do not hesitate. Do not feel that it's an imposition on me. If I can help any animal and their caregivers, it's enough for me. So I just want to thank everyone very much for listening to this and planning for our pets. I've seen the results of people not planning for the pets, and it's just not a pretty situation. So thank you again for listening, very much for listening. And look forward to your feedback and questions.
Great. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and type them in the Q&A. I'm just going to tell from a veterinarian's perspective some of my experiences. Actually, I did care for one of my patients who had pretty complex inflammatory bowel disease nearly 20 years ago. And his owner was in the last age of her life and had asked me, because he was complex and he required a lot of careful balancing with his medications and paying close attention to his daily routine and stools. I won't get into detail there, but and actually one of her family members was a veterinarian, but she was quite concerned about the quality of life because he was a larger dog, and the family member was a veterinarian, had the inside dogs and the outside dogs, and she didn't want this dog who had shared her single malt scotch with her to be outside. And so that was an important thing to her. And I, of course, agreed because I absolutely adored both her and the dog. And he spent the last 5 years of his life with me because she did predecease him. I did not expect a fund, but she had put some resources in her trust, and he did have some complex medical issues towards the end of his life that allowed me to be more cautious and capable of looking into them and making sure quality of life could be maintained as much as possible. And I would have done it anyway, but it was a little bit of comfort to say I can run this test that I might have to think twice about doing, or keeping him in the hospital for pneumonia, or seeing if we can, get this medication to get him a quality of life again. And he was a 14-year-old, 85-pound Labrador when we lost him, but it was still an opportunity to help him was made easier, and those decisions were less complex because of the resources that had been left for him. So I think that's a valuable thing to think about.
I do have a question though. Did you have to share the single malt scotch every night? Keep the tradition going?
No, I didn't spend any of the trust money on that, I promise.
Well, and then what you say, from a veterinarian's perspective, I'll share pituitary tumors are not uncommon in rats when they get older, and strokes are also very common in rats. So I've had a number of fur babies in all of the rats I've cared for where I'd have to hand feed them. I have to, especially bathe them and do things, it's just a lot of hands-on work. Fortunately, my husband was actively involved too, so that allowed me to be able to do that. But you say, oh, can you take care of my pet rats? You just have to make sure they have food and water and fresh food every day, and you give them a little bit of rat love. Well, that's when they're young. When they get older, the care can go up measurably, even for rats. And that's that example you shared about the fact that your skill and your expertise came in, and having to think, many people are thinking, well, should I get this test done? That's could be the difference in quality of life that we may not think about if we haven't had older pets in our lives. Yes.
And we did have a question. I guess it came in on the chat. So if anyone's having trouble on the Q&A, please use the chat. So here's a question. I'm wondering how people find trustees. It seems a challenge would be not only to find someone financially responsible to oversee the use of funds in a pet trust, but also to find somebody who would understand the kinds of veterinary interventions I would personally elect for my pet to maintain the pet's standard of care.
I can speak on a high level. Again, don't hesitate to reach out to me individually for more specific recommendations or answers. A trustee, there's two kinds of trustees, being very simplistic. There's what we call a corporate trustee. That's a professional trustee or professional fiduciary. And there's some very good ones in our community. These are people that act as a trustee, that have their license, they're bonded, they're fiduciary, and they manage the trustee role of a trust. They're very commonly used, again, in a situation with special needs trusts and special needs with trusts that go on beyond the lifetime of trust owners, because they can step in. And I'm using an example. It's not related to pets, but just to give an idea of how this works. Someone wants to leave money to their 3 children. Maybe one of their children is pretty financially irresponsible, perhaps has a substance abuse issue, other issues going on. And they say, well, I don't want to not leave this person money, but if I do, it's not going to end well. And so that portion of the estate can go into a trust, which is overseen by this fiduciary or this professional trustee. And that person basically acts within the guidance of your trust. Okay, so in the situation we talked about, we're talking about the animal, you can have that trustee. Again, I can give you some names of local people in the Greater Bay Area and local that do this kind of work. Another option with a professional trustee is banks. Some banks have a trust service. Tend not to be a fan of that because they charge a lot of money and they don't really have this kind of specialty. They're more finance side of it. So even, I mean, they're selling a product or they're more finance driven, and this is a little bit different of a specialty. So oftentimes for I'm calling it the financial guardianship side of things on the financial side. Again, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, but look into professional fiduciaries or professional trustees, interview them carefully, make sure you like them. But the one thing to know about them is they have to follow the terms of your trust. They can't change anything. So it's a really good thing if you have that concern about the finance aspect. There are, as far as the person that will care for them will understand that work and responsibility. I would recommend talking to some of these organizations that, and I said, Marianne can probably say that better than I can, but there's a few organizations here locally that you can make arrangements with them in advance, talk to them in advance, say, this is the needs of my animal. These are the expected future needs of my animal. Find out if they take on that type of animal and they take on that kind of care level. Do all of this in advance. And then if that works out, you find out what, if any money that you would be leaving to this organization, that organization in that situation would step in as that role as the caregiver of your animal. Hope that was helpful. That was a lot. But that solves for, you may have someone that's perfect caregiver, but doesn't fully understand the workload that may be responsible, but you think that person's a good person. I would recommend, and Marianne, please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm kind of stepping a little bit into your lane here, talking with your veterinarian and meeting with them or talking with them with this person so the veterinarian can explain it to them. Oh, okay, your animal has a specific condition. This is the likely the care it's going to need. And this is likely somebody that has the knowledge to be able to explain it to them. And make sure that person knows that you have another option, which is one of these organizations. So they won't do what so many people do is, of course I'll do that, right? Because they don't want to let you down. They don't want to not be there for you. It gives them an opportunity to say, I would love to do this, but I don't think I'm capable. So that's your plan B. If that makes sense. I'm speaking it from a planner side. So Marianne, if you want to add anything to that, please.
Yeah, and I mean, I have a unique situation because I have a special needs brother for whom I will be carrying out a special needs trust. So at another level, the fiduciary, I think in whatever's in the trust lists the details of the fiduciary. So if it includes all veterinary care, my understanding, and Kristina, correct me if I'm wrong here, but is that the fiduciary is obligated to pay for what's intended in the trust. For example, there's certain activities that are very important to my brother, and I know that we're going to have those in the trust as something that the fiduciary will dispense money for. And I think that kind of answers this question about veterinary care. And it actually leads into the next question, because somebody else asked this question. If many people have pet insurance that would then move with the dog, or the cat or the rat or the horse, and if that were the case, isn't that something, the premiums for that would be something that would be then planned for as part of the trust?
Yes, most definitely. The thing with pet insurance, though, is that you want to be careful of what it covers and doesn't cover. Some pet insurances, and again, I'm just almost have to have Marianne talk about this in more detail from the veterinary side of things. They don't all cover all the same things, and if the needs of your animals change, the insurance may be more of a partial cover rather than a full cover. But certainly, if the type of pet insurance you have does transfer with the animal for the remainder of the animal's lifetime, provided premiums are paid, that really makes a big difference. Then that would be part of your estate, is also turning that insurance policy over to the new owner, so that they would have that. And again, as it follows the pet, that does help out. But it would be a consideration of carefully looking at what that insurance covers and what doesn't. Now, if your animal's young, it's really hard to know what they're going to need in the future. That's why, if anything, what I usually say is overfund, not, you have to do crazy Lona Hemsley. Oh my gosh, that dates me right there, doesn't it? Look her up.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. You have to, kind of crazy level on things, but you can, if you have a thing there and beyond when my animal's lifetime, the remainder in that portion of the trust, or that trust goes to, and again, not trying to BirchBark, but an organization, right? It's going somewhere for the good of future animals. So it's staying in the vein of helping animals. That way you kind of hedging both ends. You're doing this great donation beyond your lifetime, but you're making sure your animals cared for first. But certainly that does help a lot with it. I wanted to add to the earlier question as well, is because of that hard law that the animal becomes property, if the person designated as a guardian does not do a good job, there's very little anyone else can do about it if it doesn't have a trustee overseeing that. Okay, so when you do what I call the simple version, where it's kind of a will or kind of an informal contract, once the animal transfers to this person, they can do whatever they want. Once the money transfers to this person, they do not have to spend $1 on the animal, and there's nothing anybody can do about it legally. They just don't. So it depends. That's why I say it has a lot to do. But as you imagine, and for any of you that have done this, trust planning costs money, right? There's some costs involved. So how much you want to spend on this is also a factor. But you know that the more layers you put in there, the more protection you have to be sure your animals can receive exactly the kind of care from exactly the people that you want it to be. I have very, very sadly done an estate settlement plan that was very adversarial and unpleasant. But the person who got the animal, because it wasn't a formal trust, right? It was sort of like, oh, and you get the animal, and everybody sort of knew it. He had a bit of a problem, and he didn't take very good care of the animal. And eventually the animal was so sick. And it had to be almost like a court. I don't know if court order is the right word, but they had to take legal action to take the animal away because he was such a bad caregiver. So, it has to get really bad when there's an intervention to that degree that an animal can be seized or taken away. Mm-hmm. And so I, said the person just wasn't able to do this because they had a lot of other issues in their life going on that the pet owner didn't see. And, came over, oh, I love your dog, oh, play your dog, oh, you're the one. Well, no, he's not able to care for himself, much less an animal. And so those having that trustee that oversight is a consideration. But I also don't want to stop people from doing some form of planning because it seems like, oh my gosh, I have to do all this work. Do something, and you can always add on to it, but have something in place. And the very basic thing is just knowing how to care for your animal, not just who cares. So you take care of two spot, and here's some money. Oh, no, how do I do this? What exactly do they need? Does your animal have an allergy? Right? Does it need a certain type of? These are things that people have to know. And because of confidentiality, it's hard for people to get this information after the fact. You'd be amazed at how much information becomes inaccessible beyond your lifetime. Amazed at how much information. Yeah. I'd love you to comment on the veterinary side of things.
Actually, it's very interesting. One of the veterinarians from this area now does writing for certain, she's getting a journalism degree, and actually called me about one of the issues, which is the authorization to treat. So when people go on vacation, I quite often will say, whoever your pet sitter is, make sure they have a letter saying that they're authorized to treat for a medical emergency. And, what are your standards? Will you be reachable? Who do you trust? And so I get these letters sometimes that say, do whatever Dr. Birch says, which is very flattering. But luckily, those are people where I know what their standards of care and quality of life standards are. And so I feel comfortable with those. Obviously, I'm going to talk to them in the situation, but there have been problems where a pet sitter, while people are vacationing, come in and say, can you do this surgery? Well, there's not authority from the owner for that to happen. And so having some type of authority to care when you travel is important. So a similar thing. And interestingly, one of our webinars next year is going to be peace of mind preparedness, which is disaster preparedness person, Wanda Vollmer, and talk about preparing for your pets for evacuations or accidents and all of these things that are unanticipated. And is there a place and a way that you can have this information available so it doesn't become a task to extract that information to do what's right for the pet?
Especially, and you bring us in an evacuation situation or a really big emergency situation, there's not a lot of time sometimes to get a hold of the right people. So going to a horse situation, a horse needed to be evacuated from a fire. The person who had the horse did not have a trailer to trailer the horse out, and she was too old to, physically too old to be able to really have a lot of horse. Her husband, who normally took care of the horse, was out of town. So evacuation orders, fire coming, no trailer on property, and she physically was not able to, take care and get the horse out of there. Fortunately, what saved the day was a neighbor rode her horse out for her.
Wow.
So literally rode the horse. I don't remember how many miles the story was. This is not a client of mine. It's a story I was told by a client. Rode the horse out of the area. So there must have been enough time to get the horse out, but that was the only way to do it and save its life. And not only rode the horse out, the neighbor also made sure she got out okay. So this is an extraordinary situation. But you think about things like the Paradise Fire, the CZU fire, especially the Paradise Fire, because it was no time to react, right? And if you're not home and someone's got to grab your animal and run, and then there's an issue and we have to go to the veterinarian, and the veterinarian's like, I can't take orders from you. This is not your animal. Right? All these little things. And I don't want to leave it on a negative note. We plan for these things, so if they ever happen, we know that we're doing everything in our power to care for our babies.
Yeah, it's being prepared, not being paranoid. So
exactly. And I'm sure if you put a list of, okay, if you had to evacuate, what are the top 3 things you're going to grab? We pretty much all know what's at the top of that list. Right?
Yeah.
So this is just one more layer of planning that you do to think about all the possible things that can happen and planning out there. And I've seen in doing planning around this over the years, I've seen some really creative ideas that people have come up with. There's even a situation where you can have more than one caregiver. Remember I mentioned earlier that emergency person that can get very quickly to your location, and then the long-term person. And some places people even have more than one person, right, for different reasons, and then have that almost like group of people that they'll do. So there's a lot of ways to do that. But you maybe again someone that you want to be the caregiver, maybe he's not the same person you want to give a key to your house. So factoring all these things in is really important. And beyond your lifetime, just like that beautiful story you told about having the single malt scotch, every day with their animal. It's a powerful thing to know that you can continue to care for your animal, even if you're not able to, you're no longer here. It's a really great thing. And the fact, again, people are listening to this and considering this has shown how far we have come as humans and in our caregiving responsibilities for our animals.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a beautiful note to end on. I do want to make one more quick comment about the insurance question, because from the veterinary perspective, if you have a young dog that has insurance and you allow enough money in a trust to pay a premium, you can actually make the medical bills less, obviously policy depending. But I think that question was a good one to say, if we cover premiums, then you also give another layer of financial support to the primary caretaker for that pet. So That was a little off point, but I wanted to throw that in so people think about it that way.
All of this is collectively an important part of planning, and you have good people on your team that have knowledge in this space is really helpful, because we're talking here specifically about planning for our pets and our lifetime and beyond, but it also fits in with other areas of your life you're planning. And like it's not a silo. All pieces are interconnected with this. So you think about, okay, I'm planning, I got to update my trust, I got to make sure I have everything in order. Oh, the insurance. Well, that's a whole other aspect of what exactly does that cover. And a good planner can help out with this process to put all those pieces together and make sure that things are covered the way that you want them to be covered. And it would be probably a wise thing to review the coverage on your pet insurance as your pet ages. And if your pet is diagnosed with specific conditions, just to make sure it's still going to cover what you expect it to cover as your pet's needs change, just like we do with our health insurance, right? I'm 53, almost 54, so my health insurance is different today than it will be 10, 20 years from now, right? My needs will be different medically. And so the same goes for our animals as well.
True. Great. Well, I thank you very much. I think this was really helpful. I have seen both ends of it, not only having taken on a pet, but also seeing patients that are able to get the care that their original owners wanted them to get because of finances left for the pet's care. So I've seen it be just a beautiful thing to keep a quality of life up for a pet. So I'm glad that you were able to share your background and recommendations with us.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I'm in service. That's my role as a planner. That's my role with animals and people as well. So if anything that was shared today makes a difference in an animal's life and the animal's caregivers, right? Because we're the ones that are making all this possible. It's an honor. It's truly an honor to be able to support in this way. So I encourage bring any additional questions you have. Again, more than happy to answer your questions. Also, BirchBark is an amazing organization. I cannot stress enough the things that they do and the power that they do. I've had clients lose their I can't always say fur babies because sometimes they're scaly and stuff, but they lost their dear pet, and they're grieving just so terribly. There's been such great levels of grief and suffering, and years later, even it's still there. And what they say to me, because when you talk to people about their finance and their life, the conversations can become very intimate, and things are shared with me that maybe isn't shared with a lot of other people. It's a very open space, a very vulnerable space. And they say nobody understands, because what the response is when I'm grieving or I'm sad is, it's just an animal. And that makes the pain so much worse. Suffering is just as great if it was a family member. And so the grief counseling and those services is so incredibly important, because there's just not a lot of resources for when people lose an animal, if they don't have people to understand that around them in their lives. So I wanted to kind of add a little. I know you talked about all the resources and amazing things that BirchBark does, but that's a really, really big one right there. That's a really big addition. And the final one I have to say, okay, I gotta say it's because I'm seeing this other side of it. Inflation is real. Sorry, I'm gonna time date this video a little bit. Inflation is very real, and it's really impacting a lot of people, especially people living on a fixed income. And people are having to make choices right now. The food banks are full. I support a number of food banks. I'm involved with them, and the need is skyrocketing because inflation is really crushing household budgets. And the more fixed that income is, the more it's crushing. So a situation when someone has to make a choice between getting their kids medication, paying the rent, buying food or gas, and taking their pet to the vet, something's got to give. And the animal can't do much for itself. It has to trust and rely on that human. So the idea that there's a way that people can get the resources they need to not have the pet suffer, nor the owner suffer because they can't care for the pet, it's incredibly powerful. You're really affecting two lives every time that happens. So I want to thank you very much, Marianne, for just the work that your organization does, because it's hugely, hugely needed. And again, I feel like I'm taking us off the conversation. Everybody came to listen to us. It's just important because I seeing it from the other side of it, and it's just important, anything that we.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thank you for
Well-
being there, and thank you for almost at 10.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think that you did such a great job to say we preserve, we honor, and, you know, we enhance the human animal bond with the work that we do at BirchBark. And thank you for supporting it. And the community supports us beautifully. So that's part of why we're still here. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, in addition to a copy of the video, we'll send out the links to the other organizations that Kristina mentioned, and then Kristina's information as well. For questions, again, you have to mention BirchBark if you contact her, so she realizes where you're coming from with questions. So, all right.
Well, thank you, everyone. Have a splendid evening. And I will hear from you if you have questions. And if not, I will look forward to seeing you at the future BirchBark events.
Thank you. All right. Good night,
Bye.
everyone.